This is Monocle on Design, a show where we discuss everything from architecture and craft to furniture and graphic design. I'm Nick Manise. On today's program, we've got highlights from the second edition of the Parisian design salon Matter and Shape. Plus, we learn about the Brutalist architectural style in Japan and enjoy a visit to the Young V&A in London to meet designer Charlie Boyden. All that coming up on Monocle on Design. Hello and welcome to today's show. I'm joined in the studio by Monocle's Grace Charlton.
Bonjour. I think this is a special Parisian edition. So, I'm happy to be here with Nicolas Muniz, who is a little bit French, I believe.
A little bit French, something like 4 or 5 generations ago. It's a made-up surname that sounds French, and I think that's important, and that's probably where we need to leave my family history for today. But yeah, we were in Paris, which I do appreciate because I'm going to be honest, French pronunciations aren't my strong point, so it is handy having you there as a native French speaker. I find myself often just sitting at cafes and restaurants waiting for you to order for me, which I must say is quite handy. But tell our listeners why we were in Paris.
We were there for many reasons, one of which was actually the new Monocle Cafe and Shop, which opened on the Rue Bachemont, which is really delightful. If anyone's in Paris, make sure you go there. And it was also Paris Fashion Week, so I caught a few shows, and it was Matter and Shape, this new design salon that takes place in the Jardin des Tuileries. A gorgeous location. Yes,
it was the second edition of Matter and Shape. That's what pulled me there. I was there for that singular purpose. But it's essentially, I don't want to call it it's not a trade show. How would you characterise it?
I think they make a point of calling it a salon, and I think when Dan Thorley, who's the founder of this new design event, he chose that word specifically because it evokes sort of an old-timey, romantic, intellectual view of a place where you gather and you meet and you have conversations and you exchange new ideas. So I think I would call it a salon.
And it does fit that bill. But essentially there were around 60 exhibitors there, designers and design brands showcasing their wares, kind of new, old, experimental, everything from gorgeous mirrors to, little glassware and tableware. But give us a few of your standout contributors.
I really did like the Noga collaboration with Willow Perron. So Noga is a Stockholm-based design gallery that is sort of having new life breathed into it. And they've collaborated with this LA-based creative called Willow Perron, who's super famous for the stage design he does for people like Rihanna and Beyonce. And now he's made this sort of more accessible collection of tiny little coffee tables and these cool mirrors that can be sort of brought into people's homes. They're really modular. They've got cool rounded corners. They're cast from fiberglass. So that really did catch my eye.
But it felt a little bit retro. I don't know if it's the had a very light green colorway, very pastel green colorway, and like you said, these kind of curved corners. It felt almost 1970s inspired.
Dare I say retro-futuristic?
Here we go, right into this world. Why do you think the obsession with retro-futurism has come about? Why are people kind of nostalgic for this, I don't know, space age kind of feel?
It's just always fun. It's always fun to have a little bit of space age in a room. I'm such a sucker for it. I don't know. It just is cool, and I think that is Why do you think?
I don't know. Maybe there's like this nostalgia for it in terms of like. It makes you think of your childhood. I feel like no matter when I didn't grow up in the 1970s, but for some reason it still feels nostalgic, wanting to maybe be an astronaut, put on that suit, and then you kind of see these forms and you're like, wow, yeah. I feel warm and safe and like a child again. Maybe there's a little bit of that.
Well, sometimes I think it's the romanticism of technology barreling forward, because maybe we've barreled a little bit too far forward, but that was when it sort of all began, and there were all these grand ideas of, space and our homes. So
it feels like the right safe amount of technology. Maybe that's what we're going for. But it kind of leads to another exhibitor there, NM3. They used a lot of kind of very, very shiny metal in their work, which again kind of feels like it's playing into that world.
Yeah, NM3, a Milan-based trio of designers. They had this really cool day bed that featured pony skin on it, and I'm currently obsessed with pony skin.
Is this a trend you've observed more broadly?
100%. In fashion and in design. I've actually got my own modernist pony skin chair at home, which every time I see it just brings a smile to my face. I don't ever sit on it because I don't want to ruin it. But it's quite a fun little touch of material.
But what do you think is part of the appeal there? I mean, I feel like we're going into the appeal of these kind of trends. Is it again, is there some, maybe for me, some sort of childhood link to feeling like I'm on like a
cowboy?
Yeah, or dressed like a cowboy, or feel like I'm on a holiday at a hobby farm with my family and I'm kind of getting like little horse rides on the weekend. I don't know. Is that part of it maybe?
It's just nice to stroke, isn't it? And I like the sort of neutral tones of the brown and the black and the cream, but then the pattern, it's organic. Oh, I'm obsessed.
So farm chic, retro, future chic, that's kind of the direction we're going in?
Exactly. What were your highlights, McManise?
I think I definitely put those two in amongst it. I think the other thing that jumped out for me was at the very back of the salon, they had a shopping space where you could essentially, because I think a lot of the time when you're at, whether it's an exhibition or a salon like this one, you're seeing amazing couches, sofas, big pieces of design that you can't readily put in your carry-on luggage to take home on the Eurostar. By contrast, Matter and Shape at the very back was selling kind of like the little objects that all of these brands and makers were making. Like NM3, we just referenced, had a lovely ashtray. There's also little lamps. There were glasses by Lobmeyer. There are all these trinkets, smaller scale objects that you could kind of bring home with you, which I think is really quite beautiful.
Yeah, definitely. I could see you ready to slam down that company card. Well, we only bought magazines. They had a really beautiful selection of magazines, which obviously we're complete suckers for.
100%. I mean, I think that was it as well. They'd also kind of built this archive of great design media that they were also willing to share. What was curious, though, in this shopping area, it felt like a very kind of different demographic to what you would typically see at one of these events. And maybe this is part of the appeal of Matter and Shape. I feel like normally when I go to these, they can be quite businessy and very transactional, and you might get developers and architects, kind of old Italian businessmen there, doing deals. But this felt very different.
Yeah, no shiny suits, no lanyards in sight. It was definitely a bit more of a fashion-y crowd. As we said at the beginning, it was Paris Fashion Week. I also ran away to catch a few fashion shows every now and again and then came back. And I think the crowd there was a lot more fashion-y. I mean, how did you feel about this, Nick? Because I know that maybe sometimes you feel a bit threatened by the fashion crowd.
Look, I like to think I can hold my own. I do have a well-documented modelling career, both in Monocle and externally. To be honest, it's a surprise I wasn't on the runways. But I do think equally, I noticed this shift. It was certainly more feminine than it is typically. There are a lot more women around. It felt like a little bit of a younger demographic. And I think this is ultimately a good thing. And we're constantly talking about this intersection between fashion and design. But what we saw at this salon is more maybe an intersection of those crowds. And I think that's a good thing. I think we've talked before about architecture maybe having a little bit of an image problem, but I think to a certain extent, design does as well. I mean, fashion holds this place in pop culture. People deeply care about what celebrities and movie stars are wearing on red carpets or on a day-to-day basis. But there's less of an interest, I would say, in how people are furnishing their homes. And I think what I always find kind of funny about that is, whilst yes, fashion, the way that we dress is the way that we present ourselves to the world. It's our external face to everything. We're immediately judged on it. Ultimately, the objects we surround ourselves with can have more of an impact on our life than our clothing. I think that's why I find this so fascinating. Choosing the right lights, it's going to affect your circadian rhythm, how you get to sleep, how you wake up, sleeping in a comfortable bed. That's incredibly important. I think that's what I liked about this. Did you observe similar shifts? Were there people engaging with design that perhaps you didn't expect to?
I think design is definitely becoming very cool, very fashionable, for lack of a better term. Sometimes I worry about what it will do in terms of accelerating the trend cycle in design and the sort of attention economy that you see a lot in fashion. But I think what fashion really does well, and design can learn from, like you said, in terms of managing images, they're a lot stronger when it comes to visual identity, branding, and the psychology of desirability. And like you can be a small brand, but you don't know how to communicate that story or present yourself in a way that will draw eyes on social media. And that is just the reality of business.
So I think there's maybe two things. If we're going to summarise this nicely, put it in a beautiful little nutshell, I think there's kind of two things to take away from this. I guess maybe it's just my desire that people care a little bit more about design and invest in it on a broader cultural level, rather than just settling for that IKEA couch because we've always sort of had it, but really thinking about how the objects we surround ourselves with can be a reflection of us and also improve our lives. But maybe you've hit on the way to do that, and that's for the design industry to kind of look towards fashion, look at how they tell their stories, look at how they communicate with people. And maybe if both of those things happen, not only are we having this beautiful coming together of design and fashion, but hopefully beautiful lives. But then again, I guess continuing on this train of thought, there are other design events across the globe where we're also seeing this creep of fashion. I mean, we've got Salone del Mobile coming up. Are you expecting similar sort of intersections there?
100%. I mean, I've only been going for a couple of years now, but it seems like it's just a growing phenomenon, and everyone I speak to when I go to Milan, they talk about it. It makes sense. There are these huge houses in Milan like Gucci and Prada, so it's definitely an interesting one. Are you excited for Salone? It's any day now.
Yeah, I mean, Milan Design Week, Salone del Mobile, big furniture fair, but like you said, this kind of blending with fashion. There's always lines around the block for Hermes. I'm expecting lines around the block for Monocle's events. We've got two taking place, one on the 7th of April, a cocktail party with Cupra, and the other on the 9th of April with Singapore Design Council. That's going to be an afternoon of, that's the Wednesday afternoon of Salone del Mobile Milan Design Week, and it's going to be an afternoon of live podcast recordings, live Monocle on designs. Grace Charlton, you'll be there.
I'm excited. Yeah, it looks chic. It looks fun.
It's going to be absolutely amazing. That's in this beautiful old church in the centre of Milan. You can find out more details at monocle.com/events. Grace Charlton, thank you very much for joining me.
Merci beaucoup, Nick Muniz.
And we'll be right back after this.
What can you learn in a minute? More than you think if you subscribe to Monocle's daily email newsletter. The Monocle Minute provides fresh analysis of breaking news and direct-to-your-inbox insights on everything from global affairs to entrepreneurship. On Saturdays with the weekend edition, we'll widen your horizons with wry observation, drinking and dining recommendations, and must-know openings. Subscribe now at monocle.com/minute.
Brutalist architecture may be having a moment on the silver screen thanks to the film quite literally called The Brutalist, but the Okinawa-based architectural photographer Paul Tullett has been turning his lens towards the building style for quite some time. His recent photo book, Brutalist Japan, a photographic tour of post-war Japanese architecture, is published by Prestel. With more, here's writer Thomas Pinheiro.
Amidst Japan's paper doors and tatami floors, the raw aesthetic of brutalism might seem out of place. Yet, for Paul Tullett, it feels right at home. He has been documenting Japan's brutalist architecture since 2019.
Brutalism is probably the most misunderstood and divisive form of architecture. This has its roots in association with totalitarian regimes, exhibiting an abundance of it as an architectural style. There's also the association with dodgy housing estates, and just a lot of general negative association in general, I think.
Tullett is drawn to brutalism's stark, raw quality and its honest expression of materials and structure. To him, the style contrasts with the illusion of transparency often projected by the now more widespread glass and steel buildings, something that rarely holds up. In Japan, brutalism merges with a long-standing tradition of meticulous craftsmanship, producing forms that feel both robust and elegant.
I think the biggest standout, though, is the sheer brilliance with which the buildings are executed. They're really a function of exquisite carpentry on the part of very skilled craftsmen that are tasked with making the timber molds.
Although concrete is a hallmark, Tullett views brutalism as defined less by the material itself and more by its intent and expression.
I would say it's more about the honesty of the materials used, or the presentation of the materials used. That said, I see a lot of combination of concrete with both glass and timber. That the glass, concrete, timber combination works really well, particularly with an incorporation of greenery.
Still, as in other parts of the world, brutalist architecture in Japan often draws criticism, especially from visitors.
There's a degree of shock among some people when they learn that there's a lot of brutalism here. I think this is much to do with people's Disney-fied perceptions of Japan in a land of pagodas and temples.
To challenge this perception, Talit argues that this style derives from the very principles that have defined Japan's architectural tradition for millennia: function, simple materiality, and harmony with its surroundings. He traces the adoption of these principles to the work of British architects Allison and Peter Smithson, whose influence was key to the growth of brutalism.
Were very clear about the influence upon their work. They stated very clearly that the main influence was traditional Japanese architecture, its honesty, practicality, respect for good ratios and form.
In a country battered by earthquakes and typhoons and devastated by war, the adoption of sturdy, durable constructions was, above all, a necessity rather than a matter of style.
I guess any criticism about the existence of what are dubbed concrete monsters in the presence of wooden temples is just based on an understandable ignorance of the history and demands here.
Stylistically, though, Japanese brutalism is not a direct import. The style has been adapted to its surroundings and incorporates vernacular influences. This is particularly evident in Talit's adopted hometown of Nago, in the subtropical prefecture of Okinawa, where elements like breeze blocks and traditional roofing temper the severity of concrete. One of the most remarkable examples is Nago City Hall itself.
Nago City Hall represents something of a watershed moment in not just Okinawan but Japanese architecture as well. It was designed by Team Zo, or Elephant Design Group, in 1979 and was completed in 1981. Now, Team Zo are considered a little bit contrarian and eclectic, but here I would say they've really come up with something that beautifully blends the use of concrete with traditional Okinawan elements. It's very much centered upon the banyan tree design, affording much light and ventilation. It's really the main iconic landmark building in Nago, which is in the north of Okinawa.
Sadly, calls to demolish Nago City Hall are all too common, and they echo the fate of many brutalist structures across Japan. The standard justification cites outdated technology, allegedly ill-suited to natural threats like earthquakes and tsunamis. To Talit, however, these arguments are little more than thinly veiled pretexts, rooted less in structural necessity than in marketed interests and the drive for redevelopment. Another building threatened by the wrecking ball is Nago Civic Hall, a concrete behemoth just across the street.
The Nago Civic Hall and Center was designed by Ochishiro and completed in 1985. This sits across the road from the Nago City Hall, but it represents more of the no-nonsense brutalism that people in the UK, Europe and elsewhere might be more familiar with. It's a real monolith of a building, particularly the theatre part. But then inside it's really quite exquisite with these peachy velvet seats complementing the concrete nicely. It's got a lot of Corbusian influence, a sense of rationality triumphing over nature. At the same time, it still incorporates local Okinawan features, particularly the use of a courtyard, which mimics traditional Okinawan life. And this too has been mooted for demolition, again based on apparently failing a seismic audit, and also almost incomprehensibly a tsunami threat, or the fact that it would be susceptible to a tsunami. But to be honest, I can't see this building going anywhere. I think it would survive a nuclear blast.
Somewhat paradoxically, brutalism continues to flourish in Japan, with its ongoing use keeping these structures fresh and relevant.
To me, this is one of the major appeals of brutalist architecture here in Japan. The plethora of uses to which it's applied. Anything from institutional government buildings, schools, museums, to humble barbershops, and even small private dwellings. A lot of this is down to the fact that a lot of brutalism here is ongoing. It's not confined to a certain time period. Many contemporary builds could be dubbed brutalist or new brew.
New brew is a term Talit has introduced to shift focus from a time-fixed interpretation of brutalist architecture to a more dynamic, evolving perspective, one that acknowledges its ongoing transformation.
Because I often get people claiming that a building isn't brutalist if it falls outside of the late 50s to late 70s time frame, I've come up with new brew just to capture the fact that a lot of contemporary builds here in Okinawa and Japan more broadly fit the brutalist mantle.
Two remarkable examples of new brew are the Okinawa Prefectural Museum and the National Theatre, both built in the prefectural capital, Naha, in the 2000s.
Okinawa Prefectural and Art Museum by Ishimoto and Miki Associates is a great example of a more contemporary brutalist build. It was completed in 2007, and whilst it's got a really strong sci-fi feel, its general appearance reflects traditional Okinawan architecture, particularly in its mimicry of traditional castles and fortresses, and the fact that the breeze block is very much central to its design. The National Theatre was designed by Takamatsu Shin and completed in 2003. Yeah, it's another one of the many buildings here that employs critical regionalism and uses an aesthetic that mimics the traditional Okinawan perforated wall. This is known as the chinabu. The chinabu is a bamboo wall in Okinawan homes. So again, it's another example of incorporating traditional Okinawan features into the build. I happened to bump into a student of the architect of this building, and apparently he himself is working on boosting the sustainability of concrete architecture by incorporating black volcanic ash.
Despite its landmark status, brutalist architecture in Japan remains, at best, overlooked by the public at large, met with indifference rather than admiration.
And to be frank, people don't seem to be particularly aware of their surroundings. I've often shown people pictures of the building that they work in, and they don't even recognize it.
It's this very indifference that Talit seeks to overturn. Through his photo book, he hopes to cultivate a deeper appreciation of brutalism in Japan and beyond, and to rekindle admiration for the raw, unfiltered beauty of these once radical structures. For Monocle, I'm Tomás Pinheiro.
My thanks to Thomas Pinheiro there, and to Paul Tullett, whose photo book, Brutalist Japan, a photographic tour of post-war Japanese architecture, is published by Prestel and available at all good bookstores now. Finally on today's program, we head to the Young V&A in East London. It's the youth-focused wing of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it's there that this show's producer, Maylee Evans, met the designer and artist, Charlie Boyden. The creative is conducting the project Make Play, where he will investigate prototype research and make objects of play. Let's join Charlie at the Young V&A now.
So we're in the shed within the Young V&A. Bethnal Green, and this new little spot which they've given me to take over for the next 6 weeks. I've sort of moved my studio in. The interior of this space is like Douglas fir plywood with these like mushroom-like ceiling panels. There's like these windows with these Douglas shelves, and I've positioned a lot of my objects and furnitures and collectible things I've found and stored and kept for a while, so that is sort of like on show to entice people and to like give them a little peek into my mind, I suppose. I've got lots of different pieces of wood, lots of offcuts, this, that, bits and bobs I've either found or collected, been given. So this is a bird box I made for a show late last summer. All of its components, they're very standardised parts. So these are like cross-laminated timber sample offcuts that you'd get delivered when you're like looking to purchase a larger order. So I've taken these components and I'm just going to grab. So I've taken these components, wanted to work within the restrictions of them, like this idea of like trying to waste as little as possible, using that form to create the general structure, but then adding sort of elements of playfulness within it, thinking about if you were a bird, where you might enter, adding sort of other elements like this chimney at the top with a tapered cut at the very top to like give that sense of free dimensionality. I love sort of using holes, turning the wood into something which doesn't look like wood, in this case maybe like Emmental cheese, instead of sort of reaching to a virgin material, using these sort of different wood laminated sections. I'd hope that it adds a bit of charm to it. I'm going to have a bit of a tour with the curators. They're going to show me some of the like archived collections and some of the objects and toys and playthings that they have here at the Young V&A. You know, these objects are probably things which I've referenced and have photos of from the internet, but to see them in person is going to be cool, and I'm sure, no doubt, that will have some influence in the form, materiality, ideas, and it will feed into the playthings that I've been thinking about.
What's the relationship to the public, or I guess some of the young people coming through? Will they have a chance to come into the space, or are they going to peer through the windows? Can they get involved?
Already I've been noticing like kids appearing through, they're trying to get in the door, knocking, like looking at the objects on display. We have these Meet the Maker days where schools, visitors can come and interact, and the studio space is open, so the doors are open. One idea was to have a sort of a post-it note box where you'd ask them to invent a toy, and then throughout the 6 weeks I'd decide on a couple that I could make. So then at the end of it, we have this box of ideas, and then also just like one or two that have actually been made. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, I'm running a couple of workshops here upstairs.
And why is play so important for you, for a chair you'd made previously? The seat seems almost like one you'd find in school, but the legs are made of spring, so it's like the sculptural piece. That's quite fun. That is quite playful. But why has it been such an integral part to your practice?
We can take a lot from how freely we used to think as kids. Those sort of playful ideas maybe somewhat get lost in the seriousness of what we do as designers. For me, it's more about playing with things that I find fun, whether that is manipulating a material to seem like something else, or turning a cone into a light, or having springs as legs on a chair. These are all sort of things which I just find entertaining.
For the next 6 weeks, you're in an entirely different space. I wonder how that shift in environment, just actually being physically in a different space to your usual setup, how does that refresh or change how you're approaching your work?
It is going to influence what is made or how I'm thinking already. I seem to be drawing more. Having this space here has allowed me to like separate this project a bit more clearly, because this was always going on in the background and I was doing it here and there, but this has allowed me to really see it as a standalone project. It's very inspiring just to come here, even as a place to come and draw.
And I hear that you're inviting a couple of other makers or collaborators.
Definitely. I see Make Play as a project which isn't limited by its medium, and it's more a way of thinking rather than like what you're making with. I have kind of got a short list together of some close friends, makers of different disciplines. The idea is that these guys are going to come in at some point over the next 6 to 8 weeks, and together we're going to build on a project which it will sit under the umbrella of play, but it will be like a mix between maybe wood and, for example, weaving. My friend Henrietta Dent, she's a weaver, so we're going to see how we can like bring wood and weave together, and whether that's like a sculptural plaything or a moving curtain, it could be anything, but I guess it's this idea of bringing different mediums and trying to unite them and then create something that falls under the umbrella of play, but isn't just limited by its materiality or by its form.
Designer Charlie Boyden there, in conversation with Monocle's Maylee Evans. Make Play will be on at the Young V&A until the 18th of April 2025. It's located in London's Bethnal Green, so check out the website for more information and to find out about the accompanying workshops. And that's all for today's show. For more design stories, listen to our 5-minute midweek bonus show, Monocle on Design Extra, which airs on Thursdays. And if you enjoy print, then do pick up a copy of Monocle magazine as well. It's on all good newsstands now. Today's episode was produced and edited by Maylee Evans with help from Hunter Wang. I'm Nick Manise, and you can reach me on nm@monocle.com. Thanks for listening.